How many of you find yourselves very successful at love? Not so many. Now, why is that? You would think, how many of you ever took a class in school on how to love? No, nobody. How many of you were taught at home, sat down, formally trained at home, and you sat down with your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister, somebody in your family, and they said, okay, now, when you get older and when you get ready, to be married, this is how you should love your wife or your husband. Anybody? No, none of that happens, does it? It's interesting to me that in order to drive a car, you need a license, don't you? You have to be formally trained. You have to go and show and exhibit your skills. But to get married, have a family, and love the world around us, it just doesn't, sometimes that just doesn't work out so well, does it? How many of you know somebody that thought they were in love, but later turned out it wasn't? Don't rat yourself out here, but, we've all been there. How many of you ever married, and then here's the last question. How many of you married the very first person you fell in love with? Anybody? Okay, Sue, nice. That does happen. And, but not, it didn't happen for me. Well, actually, it did happen for me. Cindy is the first woman I ever really loved. Okay, enough of that. Okay, here's what we're going to be talking about. How many of you have ever answered life's 3 most basic questions? Okay, and I'm going to give them to you. Here, number 1, where did we come from? And you're going to hear me say this over and over again, so you might as well write this one down. Where did we come from? Somewhere in the margin, not under any heading, but just somewhere in the margin. Where did we come from? Okay, where did we come from? How did you get here? How did you end up populating this planet? Was it just the stars aligned? And many of you are going to go back and say, well, I was a product of my parents, my mother and father. They got together, and they had me as a child. Okay, I want you to go back beyond that. How did life begin? Where did we come from? Okay. Number 2, if you look in the world around us, there's some stuff that just went wrong, huh? You can see evidence of stuff that just goes wrong. And so the second question you need to answer is, what went wrong? Why is there so much junk in the world? Why is there so many people that want to lie, cheat, and steal? Okay? And the third question, and this is probably the most critical of the 3, is how do we make that stuff right? Where did we come from? What went wrong? How do we make it right? Okay? Now that's going to form in your mind your worldview. Okay? You need to have a worldview. Now, I don't want you to come to the conclusion of just cursorily, if that's a word, answering those questions and putting something down on paper. I want you to think about it. Make sure those things fit together. Make sure that it makes a cohesive whole so that you can have a lens through which you view the world. Now, if you need some help, I'll be happy to help you to answer those 3 questions because I think it's something that's important. Now, when we take all of that, and we take our worldview, and we look at religion, let's look at religion for a minute. How do I view religion? How do I view that stuff? And I want to say that there's a different way of viewing religion than there is a way of viewing Christ. Okay, God, Jesus, the whole thing there. Because most people, I would dare say, take this religious package that they put together, somehow by hodgepodge, sometimes by experience, sometimes interpreting my experiences and saying, oh, this must have happened, so therefore this must be true. And they take all of that stuff and put it in a package, and they come to this conclusion. Number 1, we think that sin, the reason why things go wrong is because people break the rules. Okay, people break the rules. How many of you ever broke a rule? Okay, we all have. We've all broken rules. And so therefore, the good life, or the way to make that right, is what? Keep the rules. Don't you think? So if what went wrong was people broke the rules, the thing that makes it right is, okay, let's obey the rules. And sometimes people put all of that together, and that's their view of religion. Now today we're going to take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and the Apostle Paul wrote this to a church, and he puts this whole thing in a different perspective. Okay, a different perspective. So today I'm going to ask you to read along with me in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 1 through 13. And it says this. he says, and we're going to put this all in context, because when you read this the first time, it's probably going to not make a whole lot of sense to you. You just go, wow, that just sounds kind of bizarre. And it might sound kind of familiar to you too. If you've ever been to a wedding, you might have heard this passage read. But when you see it as Paul originally intended for you to hear it, you're going to say, I don't know that I'm going to use that at weddings anymore. However, I'm going to do a wedding this afternoon, and I'm going to use this. So it's going to be okay. Okay, here, let's start with verse number 1. He says this, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. How many of you want to be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal today? Okay, well, Paul says this, that if you practice your religion without love, then you're just a noisy gong and clanging cymbal. How many of you like that happening when you're sleeping? Noisy gongs and clanging cymbals. Okay, not so much. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit, what significance that is. It says in verse number 2, and if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. This is a part you'll probably be familiar with. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. But we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly. But then, face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now, faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but, the greatest of these is love. Now, on the heading of your program, or on your outline there, it says, it's the best. And the reason that we put that on there is because the greatest of these is love. Now, Paul's mentioned a bunch of stuff here, right? A bunch of things that would be pretty miraculous if you could do them. And we're going to find that out as we study through this. But he says, the greatest of these is love. And if you do all of those other things without love, what are you? What did he say that you were? It starts with an N. It ends with a G. Nothing. You are nothing. You haven't accomplished really what God put you here on the planet to do. So therefore, he says, this love thing is really very, very important. So let's take a look at this. Paul wrote this letter, and in order to understand chapter 13, you must understand that it is chapter what? 13. Okay, that wasn't a trick question. It's chapter 13. What does that imply to you? Well, it tells you that there are how many before it? 12. 12. And if you look in your Bible, how many are there after it? Anybody know? 3. 3 after it. Okay? 14, 15, and 16. It ends at chapter 16. Now, the significance of that is that this is part of a story. If we don't understand the story, we'll never understand chapter 13, verses 1 through 13. We'll never understand it. We'll think, oh, that's a cool thing to read at a wedding. You know, love is all these things, patient, kind, and I hope my spouse does all those things. However, imperfectly it may happen. It usually is kind of a mess. But the truth of the matter is that it's part of a story. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story. Okay? Now, today we're going to be looking at those first 3 verses, but today I want you to know the story. Now, anybody know anything about Corinth, the city of Corinth? It's in the nation of Greece. It's Greece. Now, anybody know anything about the geography of Greece? Okay, the southern part is big and bulbous, and it narrows down to this little spot of land that's 4 miles wide, and then it blossoms out again into a big nation. So there's this little spot there that's 4 miles wide where the sea comes in from the east and from the west. To go around is hundreds of miles. And so in ancient times, this place was a city that was a hub of enterprise. Now, 4 miles wide, and the commerce would come from east to west and west to east as ships would come in, and they would unload, and then it's kind of interesting, they would come from the, let's see, for you guys, this is going to be west. Okay, they would come from the west, and they would unload there at Corinth, and then they would travel, they would take all those goods by land, the 4 miles, load them on another ship over here so that they can continue going west. Okay. Also from the east, the same thing happened. They would dock, and they would unload, and then they would take it by horseback or, well, camelback, and, rent a camel or whatever, So they would rent some camels, and they'd take it across and load it on another boat and take it off. Now, travel from north to south all went through there because the land narrowed down. So you could imagine this is a very pivotal location. If you are thinking commercially, you're thinking, that's a good piece of land to own. Now, if we go back a little bit, in 146 BC, Rome comes to Corinth. Okay, comes to Greece. And Rome is the world power of its day. And Rome says, hey, we don't mind you guys just surrendering. Wave the white flag, and you can become part of our nation, and we will just rule you. Well, the people at Corinth, the Greek people, they weren't so crazy about that. They kind of wanted to be autonomous. Anybody here ever say, you're not the boss of me? Well, in Corinth, that was the watchword of the day in 146. You're not the boss of me. We're going to fight you to the death. And Rome, being very powerful, they subjected them. In fact, Rome says, you can join us or you can die. And so if you fight us, you're going to die. And so in 146, it was a desolate area because Rome had come there and had just wiped it out. Now, later on in Rome's history, about 100 years later, Julius Caesar comes to power. And he realizes the value of this land. Because as the world is getting larger and as travel is becoming more prevalent and as commerce is being established, he says that's a good piece of land to own. So what he did was he went to Corinth and established a Roman garrison there, a little army outpost. And so they get to control this land, this little piece of land that's going to become very productive. Now, another 100 years down the road, which is the time we're talking about right now, Paul is going to Corinth. Now, in the meantime here, as it has built up, as it become larger, the succeeding 100 years, it experienced this explosive growth. Okay, people recognized. Now, if you were a good real estate person like Mike Damon, you would go and you would say, I would like to own as much of that property as possible. Okay, and so the real estate agents, they got there. And they established their little outpost there. And so now comes along the commercial people that says, you know what? I can rent a camel here for these guys that bring boats here. I can load their cargo, transport it over here, and offload it onto another boat to keep on going west. Or to you guys, that's east. Okay, keep going east. And so they came, they bought some property, they established a little business, they got a bunch of camels, and these guys that are living in the area said, oh, you know what, we can sell mules and camels to these guys. And so they start herding up all these things, and commerce just blossomed. And the trade routes all came north to south, south to north, and north to south. And so that became the hub and the center, and people said, you know what, this would be a good place to lay over on your trip, so we'll just establish a little hotel here. And Motel 6 started. Not really. But they said, there was this mindset of the people who came to Corinth that we can be successful here. We can build a life. We are hard workers. We're pretty inventive. We can do stuff. We have power to get things accomplished. We can organize. We can recruit. We can do all of this stuff. So the people at Corinth were really pretty sharp people. However, when that kind of atmosphere exists, where it's very success-oriented, there are all kinds of offshoots to this success that happen as well. And the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was situated on a hill just above Corinth. And as the night would come, 1,000 temple prostitutes would come down into Corinth, and they would ply their wares. Let's just say that, okay? They were commercial ladies as well, okay? And no judgment. However, don't get me sidetracked here. So it's a multi-ethnic situation. It's diverse. I mean, the belief of these people is diverse. It was a hubbub. It was hundreds of thousands of people. It was a huge place. And it was the center of commerce, the center of business. It was the center of everything in its region. So now, Paul comes into this situation. The Apostle Paul, called by God to be a witness to the world. And he comes into this kind of situation and establishes a church. Now, it's kind of interesting, because as Paul comes to Corinth, he's come from travels, and he's kind of going around Asia there, and he's come from Athens, and now he's making his way down, and there's a place called Philippi. And at Philippi, he actually got beaten. He got beaten. So he had a bad time in Athens. He went to Philippi, got beaten there, and physically beaten, and now he comes to Corinth. So you can imagine he's a little bit out of gas. He's a little bit out of gas, and a little bit probably disillusioned about this whole thing. I thought that serving God was going to be this great, wonderful thing, and I was going to be a huge success. And everybody wants to be a success, don't they? Everybody wants to be good at what they do. And so Paul's kind of on the downside of that, and he's just kind of questioning himself. And so in Acts chapter 18, verse 9, is the historical account of when Paul comes to Corinth. Okay? And in Acts chapter 18, verse 9, it says this. And the Lord, in fact, I have it right here. And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, don't be afraid. Well, you can imagine he's afraid. He just got beaten. Okay, don't be afraid, but go on speaking and do not be silent. Now, he's in the city of Corinth, remember? And all of these people are hugely successful. I mean, it's diverse. It's just all over the place. And it's not, here, let me say this. One thing it is not Christian. It is not Christian. In fact, they're very pagan. Very pagan, and we'll find some allusions to that here in what he wrote to the Corinthian church. He says, do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. Now, the funny thing here is when Paul hears these words, that many people there who are not my people, who are my people rather, they are not yet his people. Paul, speaking to them and showing them who Christ is going to cause them to become God's people. So now Paul gets this thing in his head. He says, God's told me that in this pretty crazy environment here, people are going to come out of that and be God's people. I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to look like. But he told me to talk, and so I'm going to talk. And so he starts speaking, and people from this environment listen to him, and they say, I buy that. I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and he came here to change my life. And I don't mind my life being changed, because I want to be the greatest success that I can be. And if I cooperate with God who created me, who knows what makes me successful, then I want to cooperate with that. And so here he goes. He goes and he starts teaching the people about Jesus. Now, in 1 Corinthians 9 through 11, and I got a little ahead of myself here, so let me just go back. Okay? Now, God's going to use Paul, right? He's going to use Paul to create a church out of, and here, let's not say this, but let me say it by myself. Don't ever repeat this, okay? Even though it's going to be recorded. Those people, okay? Those people, those pagan people, those people that go to the temple ladies. Okay, let's just leave it there. Okay, those people are going to be God's people. Now check this out. Now later on, as he goes and he establishes church. He's there for like a year and a half. Now this letter that we're studying today is after Paul has left, and he sends a letter to them. Okay, so this is well after he's established the church. Now notice what he says about the people in the church here. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And, such were some of you. Now, what kind of people did he have? Did he have the model Christian people that, oh man, I can make something out of these guys? Did he have the church, as we kind of think about the church, all these really great holy people, that are just waiting to just be mobilized? No. He had people that were pagans, that were far from God. Far from God. Okay? Now, you might have seen some things in there that you say, well, there's some people in there that kind of like me. And that's the beauty of what Paul writes here. He made up a church of people that were very success-oriented, very, very, very accomplished people, but yet at the same time, very selfish people in what they practiced. They wanted, they had the philosophy, much like is prevalent in our world today. If it feels good, here, help me, Steve. If it feels good, thank you. If it feels good, do it. That's kind of their mentality, and just whatever struck your fancy. There was kind of an interesting term. There was a verb that was coined after Corinth, and it was called, as we would translate it, it would be Corinthianize. Corinthianize. Now, if I said, you guys go out and Corinthianize, what would I mean? Well, to you, some of you are giggling. Don't giggle. What it really means is go out and live life without any restraints. Live life without any rules. Just live life how you feel like living life. And that was the term that was used because in Corinth, that is the way people lived. They lived without any restraint. I mean, just whatever you thought you could make a buck at, do it. If it's something you think you might enjoy, take a stab at it. There's no rules here. Now, think for a minute here. The church at Corinth is established of people like that. Now, do you give the church much of a chance? Well, it's talked about in the Bible, so I guess it survived. But the truth of the matter is, most of us would say, boy, built on a foundation like that, that's not much. So Paul has to teach these people how to avoid being a Corinthianizer and learn to be a follower of Jesus Christ. So he teaches them for 1.5 years, and then he leaves, and then he sends them at least 3 letters after that, clarifying what he taught them, reminding them of what he taught them, and encouraging them to follow. So let's take a look here at the bombshell. Because when we read this passage of Scripture, what we think Paul's saying is, he's describing love. And isn't it an inspirational piece of material? Well, not really. Because what Paul's saying here is that you guys are so successful, so accomplished, so talented, so gifted, so energetic, so good that you've missed the point. You've missed the point. Because what they were doing was that they were going out there and they were saying that man, we're so good. Look at the results that we're getting. Have you ever seen somebody like that? Maybe even in the Christian arena. You see somebody maybe that it's very accomplished speaker, and they'll come and they'll be very eloquent, and people will say, "Man, you really changed me. You changed the way I think. You really addressed some things that I needed." And I'll have people say that to me every now and then. Not that I'm a gifted speaker. Don't get me wrong there. But people will say, when you spoke about this, it was really what I needed, right at the right time, and blah blah blah. And I could say, yeah, it was, wasn't it? And I could give myself a little. Couldn't I? And that's what was happening at the church of Corinth. They were missing the whole point. The whole point is not what they were doing, which was really rather miraculous, because if you look back in your program there, it says, Paul says this, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, okay, what's he saying? He says, if you are an eloquent speaker, and you can persuade people, and you can get people to follow you, if you can do that, how cool is that? No, he didn't say that. He said, if you can do that, but you don't have love, you're a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Now that noisy gong and clanging cymbal, you know what that was? That was an allusion to pagan practice. When the pagans would practice their faith, if we call it faith, it was faith, but they would practice their religion, what they would do is they would bang a gong or hit a cymbal or something. And what they were trying to do is get the attention of their God. They're trying to wake him up. And they were saying, hey, hello, God. Remember, we're here. Gong. Are you awake? Are you listening? Are you watching us? And then they would go on. Their goal would be to appease their God, make their God happy so that he wouldn't do bad things to them. So when Paul uses this, these people at Corinth, they knew what he was talking about when he said noisy gong or clanging cymbal. Today, we think of it as just so much noise. But what they were really doing is practicing, because there was a diversity of religion there in Corinth. And so there were pagan religions that would actually bang gongs and hit cymbals and wake up their God and try to appease him. So he says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but I don't have love, I am a pagan worshiper. That's what he says. So when you read this, do you want this read at your wedding? I don't know. I'm still going to do it today. Okay. Now, in verse number 2, he says, and if I have prophetic powers. Okay, now you know what prophetic powers to the people meant? That meant they could tell the future. They could tell the future. Okay? Now, prophetic powers in the Christian arena, there's prophetic powers there as well. And prophetic powers mean, in the Christian arena, means I can tell you what the Word of God says. The Word of God says that if, and we'll put it in a broad general sense here, if you don't repent, you'll experience separation from God. That's a prophetic word. That's what the Word of God says. And I can tell you that. That's a prophetic word. I'm telling you what the Word of God says. Another sense is that it can kind of tell the future. God told me to tell you that if you don't straighten up, and this is how we often think of it, if you don't straighten up, these bad things are going to happen next December. That would be kind of the prophetic powers that he's talking about here. So he says, if I could do that, if I could tell your future, but I don't have love, what is it? If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and knowledge, okay, if I understood everything, in other words, and if I have faith so as to remove mountains, think about this. If you had enough faith to say, okay, let this building become the permanent residence for Marina Church, and the Marina Church is going to own this building, and the Marina Church is going to blossom and grow and be big and influence a lot of people and change the complexion of the surrounding city. If you could say that with faith, that'd be a pretty cool thing, huh? If you could say, oh man, I can predict what the lotto numbers are going to be next week. Now, if you could do that, pretty powerful thing, right? Well, Paul says this about that. He says, if I could do all that stuff, have the faith to remove mountains, but have not love, I am what? Nothing. Nothing. Okay? Now, and if I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love. Now notice what he's saying. If you had the resources to give away to other people that would really benefit their lives, and you did that, but you didn't love them, he says, just doesn't work. It's not going to do anything for you. Now that's the bombshell. He says, even though you guys are supremely gifted and talented and devoted to the work of God, if you don't love people, it all comes to what? Nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Now, as a person who loves to speak, as I do, and as a person who loves to teach you guys, I love doing this. And I love the result. I love seeing in your eyes when, I can tell sometimes when you guys get it. And it's just like, I love that. And I think, God's doing something here. Now, what would I rather be known for? That kind of experience? Or would I rather people walk out of here and say, I don't have a clue what he said, but I know that guy loves me. I'd rather the latter. I'd rather it be the latter. I know Pastor Mike loves me. I know that he would do whatever he needed to do in order to make my life better. I know that. Okay? I would rather the latter be the case. Because this passage teaches us that if the former is the case, that I just love the result of using my gift, then it comes to nothing because it doesn't come accompanied with love. So let me say this to all of you here today. I love you. I love you. You're valuable to me. I love you because I love you. Not because of what you do, not because you come to church, not because you give to the offering, not because of anything. I love you because I love you. Because God has placed within my heart a love for you. And that love manifests itself in helping you in your journey with Christ. Okay? So now, that's what he's saying here. And that's the bombshell. Now, where do you think that he gets all of this stuff? Where do you think he gets this list? Now, let's in your program, turn back to the front there. And in verse number 4, where do you think he gets this list? Love is patient and kind. Okay? And does not envy or boast. Do you think he just made this stuff up? He said, let's define what love is. Let me make a list. No, this is also part of the bombshell that he drops on the church at Corinth. Because earlier in the book, and then when you read it today, you're going to find Paul talking about these people, and he's going to use some things to describe them. And some of the words that he used to describe them are this: puffed up, self-seeking, rude. I wonder where he got this list of love is. He saw what they were doing that was the antithesis of love, and he says, let me drop this bomb right in your lap here. Love is not rude. Love does not seek its own. Love is not self-serving. So therefore, all of this stuff that you guys have been doing, even though it comes accompanied with all of these miraculous gifts, he says, it's nothing. It doesn't move the cause of Christ down the road. So therefore, he says, that's what love is. He didn't just make up a list. He just didn't define a list. But he looked at what they were doing, that it did not exhibit love. So when these guys hear these words, they say, ooh, I remember when he said I was rude. And it says, love is not rude. Oh, I remember when I was just doing this, I was teaching people because of the feeling that I got of accomplishment and service. And boy, I just felt so good to me, but I didn't have love for the people. So therefore, he's talking to me. And so when they heard this, it wasn't quite as inspirational as when we hear it. So therefore, he drops this bombshell on him, and he says, you're nothing more than a noisy gong, a clanging cymbal, and therefore, he says, make some changes. Make some changes. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 5 weeks. Making some changes in the way we see love and the way that we practice love. Now, you can do some really miraculous stuff and not be a follower of Christ. Notice what it says. Well, we already talked about that, so let me get to this one here. Matthew 7, 21 through 23. Now, this is Jesus speaking. And Jesus is talking about this future day in which people will stand before God and kind of give an account. Okay? Now, if you knew that there was going to be a test tomorrow, and you knew what the questions were going to be, what would you do tonight? You'd study, wouldn't you? You'd study. You'd memorize the answers to the question. Now, there's going to be an accounting for all of us. Okay? There's going to be a day in which we stand before God, and He's going to ask us a couple of questions. One of those questions is, hey, what did you do with my son Jesus? What did you do there? And we're going to have to say, well, I went to church. In fact, I gave money to the church, and the church went out one night, and as we're going to do tomorrow, and we fed homeless people. We did some really cool things, man. It was awesome. You should have seen the lives, the looks on the people's faces, the appreciation that they expressed. Oh, you should have seen what we did. And I fear that if that's our explanation for what we did with Jesus, that we might hear these words. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Now, it sounds like these people were really right on with God, right? They prophesied. They did a lot of cool things. They fed the homeless. And they saw the looks on their faces of gratitude and appreciation. But Jesus says, oh man, you guys didn't get it right. So if you know what the question is, and here's what the question is, what did you do with my son Jesus? Here is the answer. Now, you can't just articulate this. Let you be aware of that. You can't just, I memorized the answer, and here's the answer, God. You have to live it with your life. And the answer is, I let Jesus be the leader of my life. Okay, now that's going to be evidenced by what you do. It's not just evidenced by what you say. Okay, so I let Him be the leader of my life. I accepted His gift on the cross for the forgiveness of my waywardness. And because He forgave me and loved me, I loved Him back. And by loving Him back, I followed Him. I did what He would do in the situations in which I found my life. That's the answer to the question. I accepted His free gift of grace, received forgiveness of sin, and followed Him. That's what Christianity is all about. And I hope that, and this is not always true, I hope that's been your church experience. Your church experience should be all about learning to be a follower of Jesus Christ. It's not about doing all this other stuff, but if there's stuff that a church does that is not connected to being a follower of Jesus Christ, then that's a noisy gong clanging cymbal thing. And it comes to nothing. Okay? So now, that's going to be the answer to the question. Now think about this. There are some examples in the Bible of people who were great allegedly, great followers of God who really choked. Really choked. In the Old Testament, there's this story about Balaam. Now, God can use people to accomplish his purpose, even though those people are not followers of his. Okay, now did you get that? God can use people who are not his followers to accomplish what he wants accomplished. And I'll give you a prime example, and this is one of my favorites. There's this guy named Balaam, and he's a prophet. And the kings of all of the nations around would call him and say, hey, give us a favorable prophecy in regard to this war that we are about to wage. Tell us that we are going to be victorious over our enemy. And he would, and it says he was an ungodly guy, and he would tell them what they wanted to hear. There was one situation in which God said, no, you're an ungodly guy, but I'm not going to let you do that because this is far too important. These people really need to know the truth. So he's going along, and this king has summoned him, and he's going along the road, and all of a sudden the donkey upon which he is riding comes to a screeching halt. And there's nothing in the way. No, there's nothing going on. Nothing at all. And he kicks his donkey. Come on, let's get going. Those of you who have donkeys at home know how stubborn they can be. So I see some of you do have some donkeys at home. Okay? Don't look at them right now. Okay? But the truth of the matter is that this donkey wouldn't go, and he pulled him, he kicked him, he prodded him, he did everything, but it wouldn't go. And finally, they go through this whole rigmarole. The bottom line is that there was an angel standing there, and guess what? Balaam couldn't see the angel of God. He was prohibiting him from proceeding. He couldn't see it, but you know what? The donkey could. The donkey could see the angel of God. So don't kick your donkeys too hard this afternoon. But the truth of the matter is the donkey could see the angel, and that in the end, he's yelling at the donkey, and you can imagine how you get with your donkey, and yelling at him, and in the end, the donkey speaks. He says, "What are you doing to me? I've been faithful to you all my life." And you can imagine the shock and amazement on Balaam's face when the donkey talks. Now, God, I say this, if God can use a donkey, he can use anything. It doesn't have to be a follower of his. It doesn't have to be holy and dedicated to him. God can do whatever he wants. Earlier in history, when the children of Israel were in Egypt, and Moses goes down to Egypt and says, hey, let my people go. And through a series of events, there were 10 plagues that God brought upon Egypt that were initiated by the prophetic utterance of Moses, right in front of the Pharaoh. And the funny thing was that he would do these things, and he would make his staff, throw it down on the ground. It would become a snake. And then he'd grab it by the tail, and he would pick it up, and it'd be a staff again. Okay, just a wooden staff. And Pharaoh would say, that's not so big. My guys can do that. And they would do it. So now God can use the people that are opposed to him to do miraculous things. Just because it's miraculous does not necessarily mean that these people are followers of God. So therefore, when Paul talks about this, oh, you guys are so gifted, you're so talented, you have all this stuff, but you don't have love, that's the ingredient that when you add that to the miraculousness of God, makes the difference. Makes the difference. Is the love that gets accompanied by that. Judas. Did I talk about Judas? Judas was one of the disciples. He's the one who betrayed Jesus. And he was charged, there was a point in time where the disciples were charged with the responsibility to go out and tell the good news about Jesus, and they were given miraculous powers to heal. Okay, to heal. And so they went out and they did their missionary journey, and they came back and they talked about all their stuff. Now remember, Judas was not a follower of Jesus. In fact, he was a betrayer of Jesus. He stole money from Jesus. He did all kinds of vile and evil things. But yet he still had the miraculous powers to do what the other apostles did. So therefore, just because we're highly gifted and talented, and we can sway people's minds, and we can do ministry, and we can maybe even pray over somebody and have them be healed, doesn't mean anything if we don't have love. And that's what Paul's dropping this big bombshell on these guys, because they were very accomplished, but they didn't have that love that was necessary. Now, this news was alarming to the people at Corinth. It was alarming. And I hope it's alarming to you in some ways too. It's kind of like the light that comes on your dashboard. Have you ever been driving along and this light pops on and it's red and you don't know what it means? And since I don't know what it means, what do? I just keep driving. And pretty soon my car ushers me to the curb because it's no longer running, because I ignored the warning light on the dash. And then you go in and you say, I don't know what this thing is. And the mechanic says, oh, that's your check engine light. It probably meant that you were running out of oil, or you're doing this or doing that. And your car just said, I'm not going anymore, and parked. When we see that we're doing good things for God and we don't have love, that ought to be like an alarming light on our dashboard saying, hey, check your motive. Check why you do what you do. And that makes a world of difference in the Christian arena. That's one of the big questions of life that we have to ask ourselves. Why do I do what I do? What's the explanation for that? What's the reason for that? And Paul says, if the answer to that is anything other than because I love people, then I'm a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. I'm a pagan worshiper. Okay, now what's the application? Okay, the application is threefold here today. Threefold. And I'm going to talk to three groups of people. Number one, I'm going to talk to pastors. Okay, I'm going to talk to pastors, Christian workers, people that are really involved in ministry. And I'm going to say this. If you evaluate your effectiveness based on the results of the practice of your gift, whether it be a speaking gift, a serving gift, whatever it is, and we're going to talk more about that here in the weeks to come. If I evaluate my effectiveness for God based on the results of what I get, the effectiveness of my gift, then I'm messed up. I need to evaluate my effectiveness based on the level of love that I have for people. Okay? Now, that's hard for highly talented and gifted people because we are results-oriented, aren't we? We're always saying, okay, I did this, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Now, what are the results? If I'm not getting the results, what do I need to tweak? What do I need to change? What do I need to do? I'm going to say this. Here's the thing to tweak. The thing to change is my love. Okay? And we're going to learn how to do that. So this is a work in progress, remember. Okay, there's another group of people that don't feel like you're so gifted. I'm not very talented. I don't have a lot of this. I don't have a lot of that. I could never speak in front of a crowd. I could never do this. Or I could never do that. I don't have the education, don't have the money, don't have the whatever. I'll tell you what you are good at. You're good at love. And if you're good at love, you can overcome all of the other things. Because people, 10 years down the road, you're not going to remember a word I said here today, right? But you are going to remember if I love you or not. You're going to remember that. And that's what makes a difference. That's what makes a difference. In John 14:35, it says this. By this, and what he's speaking of is love for one another. By this, all people will know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. If you have love, people will remember this about you. You must be a disciple of Jesus. If you have love. There's something different about that. There's something different about the way you respond to people. There's something different about that. What is it? Oh, I'm just reflecting the love that I've been shown. I've been shown love by Jesus, and I want you to know that too. And they go, oh, did you have to be an eloquent speaker to do that? Nah. Did you have to be a healer, a faith healer? No, you didn't have to do that. Did you have to speak in tongues or do any of these things that Paul's talking about here? No, didn't have to do that. Did you have to do any of that stuff? No, you just had to love people. Now, there's something different about the way you see people, and that affects other people. Okay? There's another group of people here, and that's the people. That's the people that are trying to earn God's favor. The people that are still trying to keep the rules so that they can qualify for God's love. And let me say this: people that try to keep the rules in order to qualify for God's love are the same kind of people that the pagans were. The pagans, what did they do? They beat their gongs, they clanged their cymbals so that they would appease their God. Okay, if I keep the rules, I'll appease God and He'll look kindly on me. It's the same kind of mentality. So I want you to know this, that if that's you today, that you probably don't fully understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ is simply this: God sent His Son Jesus to die on a cross to pay the penalty for your wrongdoing. Now, He offers that to you graciously. You don't have to do anything to earn it or deserve it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to straighten up. You don't have to say, okay, well, I'll quit doing that. I'll quit doing this. I'll start going to church. I'll do that. You don't have to do any of that stuff, even though, as I always say, I want you to come to church. Okay. so that you can learn to be a good follower. Okay? Now, he says, the gospel says that you don't have to earn the love, the grace, and the mercy of God. He gives it to you. Why? Because he loves you. Now, when you give the grace and mercy and love to other people that don't deserve it, that walk on you, that hurt you, that backbite you, you know what people say? There's a different kind of love there. That's the kind of love that changes people's lives. The one kind that's undeserved. If I do something kind to you and you say thank you, I say, I deserve that. But if you spit on me and kick me and, disparage me and do whatever, and I say, you know what, I still love you. You say, there's something different about that. Something different about that. And you, people that have fallen into that category, I hate to categorize people, but I just did. The people that misunderstand the gospel need to understand that it's not what you do that gets you God's favor. It's what he did. He sent his son Jesus to die on a cross so that you could be forgiven of your sinfulness and so that you would have a model to follow. That's why we follow. Not because we have to, but because we want to. We want to exhibit the kind of love that he showed. It says in the Bible, greater love has no man than this, that he laid down his life for his brother. Jesus exhibited that. Gave up his life, said, it's not about me, it's about what I can do for you. That is the gospel. So I want you to understand the gospel today. And I pray today that there are people in the room here that say, you know what, I need to make that commitment. I need to make a commitment to exhibit that kind of love, to receive the forgiveness of God, okay, and acknowledge that to God. Say, I receive your forgiveness, and I'm going to follow you so that I can be a great lover of people. That's what being a Christian is all about. It's simple as that. It's not signing up on a church roll. It's not about coming to church every Sunday. It's simply about, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus Christ because he has forgiven me. He sent his son Jesus to pay the penalty, to die on a cross for my sinfulness.